when you're willing to get out of your comfort zone.
You are willing to conform, you are willing to submit.
So I feel like I've been very open and really trying. And I wasn't expecting this, to be honest.
Right.
This opportunity to become Amish.
Real change only happens.
Right. I see where you're coming from, definitely. You love your mom and... Yeah.
You owe all of us an apology for how you acted.
I am escorting you off the property. Go!
Obviously I'm trying to go with the Amish way of living. I chose this for a reason. I've been trying to stay positive, but it's every day just gets worse.
Suddenly Amish Recap. Season 1, Episode 3, Beauty is Fleeting. A community at the breaking point. Suddenly Amish Recap and Spoiler Analysis. Episode 3 of Suddenly Amish, titled Beauty is Fleeting, marks the first true fracture point of the experiment. What initially appeared to be a structured, faith-based cultural exchange now begins to resemble a pressure cooker, where emotional vulnerability, rigid religious rules, and unresolved personal histories collide in deeply uncomfortable ways. This episode does not rely on shock value or manufactured drama. Instead, it unfolds slowly and deliberately, allowing tension to accumulate through small moments, a departure that shakes the group, an emotional breakdown that nearly ends another journey, and a makeover process that exposes the limits of tolerance on both sides. By the end of the hour, it becomes clear that Suddenly Amish is no longer about curiosity or adaptation. It is about power, judgment, and whether compassion can survive inside an uncompromising belief system. Matt's sudden exit. The moment everything changed. The episode opens in the aftermath of Matt's forced departure, an event that reverberates through the entire group. Matt joined the Amish community seeking spiritual grounding and a reconnection with faith following his divorce. However, that same divorce became the reason he was deemed unacceptable. James, one of the Amish authority figures, took it upon himself to expel Matt after learning that he had been divorced prior to joining the experiment. The manner of the confrontation was as alarming as the decision itself. James approached Matt with an axe in hand, a visual that instantly shifted the tone of the show from contemplative to threatening. James justified his actions by claiming Matt lacked transparency. In James's view, if Matt could hide a divorce, then he could hide darker truths as well. This reasoning, while consistent with strict Amish moral frameworks, immediately raised questions about proportionality, authority, and interpretation. What troubled the English participants most was not just the rule itself, but who enforced it. Authority versus community. Who gets to decide? Several members of the group openly questioned whether James had the right to make such a unilateral decision. Alan, in particular, believed the matter should have been handled by the Amish pastor rather than an individual acting on personal conviction. Kendra echoed this sentiment, though her reaction was deeply personal. She had developed a strong emotional connection to Matt, and his sudden removal left her devastated. Matt did not leave quietly or bitterly. Before departing, he made a point to say goodbye to Kendra, attempting to comfort her despite his own disappointment. His farewell underscored a painful reality. His presence was not rejected for his behavior, but for his past. This distinction mattered greatly to the English participants, many of whom came from backgrounds shaped by divorce, trauma, or non-traditional family structures. Matt's exit became the emotional earthquake that destabilized the entire house. Kendra's emotional collapse, when isolation becomes intolerable. Kendra's reaction to Matt's departure dominates much of the episode. Her grief is raw and unfiltered, unfolding in a series of moments that reveal how quickly isolation can become overwhelming. She retreats to a room to cry. Later, she sits alone on the porch, visibly struggling to process what has happened. Eventually, she steps into the rain and begins to dance, a wordless expression of emotional overload that feels both cathartic and deeply sad. Kendra describes the environment as beginning to feel like a prison. Without Matt, the experiment no longer feels challenging in a productive way. It feels punitive. Her distress is not just about losing a romantic interest. It is about realizing how little control she has over her own emotional survival in this setting. The Amish rules do not bend for grief, loneliness, or mental health. Several Amish women quietly acknowledge that James's decision may have been misguided. One comments that saving one soul should not come at the cost of losing two, a subtle but powerful critique of the rigidity that now threatens to undo the entire experiment. The bats. Fear, superstition, and symbolism. As if emotional tension were not enough, the house becomes host to an unsettling disturbance. Bats. Billy Joe is the first to react, panicking at the presence of the animals. She describes them as rodents with wings and expresses a visceral fear that borders on phobia. She wakes Alan in the middle of the night, insisting something must be done. Alan searches the house and finds signs of bats, but cannot locate them. This absence becomes more disturbing than confirmation would have been. Within Amish belief systems, certain events are interpreted as omens. Alan recalls a superstition that if something flies around a house more than 4 times, it can signal impending death or disaster. Unable to find the bats the next morning, Alan begins to worry that their presence was a bad prophecy, a warning about the consequences of welcoming the English into their community. The group decides to relocate temporarily to James's house, a move loaded with irony given that James is the very person whose actions caused the current emotional crisis. Living under judgment. Fear takes hold. Staying under James's roof amplifies anxiety among the English participants. His intolerance of secrecy forces everyone to confront their own hidden truths. Judah becomes increasingly fearful that his bisexuality, if revealed, would result in immediate rejection. Billy Joe worries about her past and whether it would disqualify her from full acceptance. Unlike earlier episodes, where cultural differences felt educational, this episode exposes how judgment operates as a constant psychological pressure. The English are no longer simply adapting. They are censoring themselves. Kendra reaches her breaking point. Kendra's emotional decline reaches a critical moment when she realizes she has no access to a phone. The community is in the process of building a phone shanty for emergencies, but it is not yet complete. For Kendra, the inability to contact the outside world becomes unbearable. She breaks down again, stating openly that she wants to go home. She is exhausted by the isolation, the emotional suppression, and the feeling of being trapped in a system where compassion seems secondary to rules. At this point, Kendra appears to be on the verge of becoming the second departure from the experiment. James breaks Amish rules, a quiet act of humanity. In a surprising turn, James reveals a side of himself that few expected. He gives Kendra a cell phone. The act is profound in its simplicity and its defiance. Phones are prohibited within Amish life. Physical affection, such as hugging, is also taboo. Kendra uses the phone to call her mother and tell her she loves her. The conversation is brief, but emotionally grounding. When she finishes, she hugs James in gratitude. Both actions, the phone and the hug, are violations that could lead to shunning. Yet James does not hesitate. For the first time, viewers see a conflict within him, a man torn between doctrine and empathy. In that moment, James chooses kindness over strict adherence. This single gesture changes everything for Kendra. She begins to see James not as a tyrant, but as someone capable of compassion within constraint. She ultimately decides to stay. Dress code day. Conformity becomes personal. The second half of the episode shifts focus to physical transformation as the English participants shop for Amish-approved clothing. With no air conditioning and rising temperatures, the group selects garments designed to be breathable while still modest. Billy Joe adapts with relative ease. Kendra, despite her emotional turmoil, manages the transition without major resistance. Judah's struggle is more symbolic. While the clothing itself does not bother him, Amish rules require unmarried men to be clean-shaven. Judah's mustache must go. For Judah, shaving feels like erasing a piece of his identity. It forces him to confront how much of himself he is willing to sacrifice to remain. Aaron complies fully, shaving and relinquishing personal comforts without complaint. Judah hesitates. Esmeralda's stand. Beauty as identity. Esmeralda faces the harshest judgment of the episode. She arrives at the Amish store prepared to change her clothes, but she draws the line at removing her acrylic nails and false eyelashes. For Esmeralda, these elements are not vanity. They are armor. She explains that she came to the Amish community to escape judgment from social media, not to encounter it in a different form. Her refusal immediately isolates her. She is told she cannot wear Amish dresses until she removes the nails and lashes. What makes the situation worse is perceived inconsistency. Judah is allowed to continue wearing Amish clothes despite not shaving, while Esmeralda is denied the same grace. The double standard does not go unnoticed. Feeling targeted, Esmeralda takes a stand. She will not comply simply to appease others. The moment raises a critical question. Where does adaptation end and erasure begin? Aaron's quiet sacrifice. In contrast, Aaron faces his own challenge without protest. He is not permitted to wear his hearing aids, yet he chooses to manage without them. His experience highlights another uncomfortable truth. Amish rules do not accommodate disability or difference. Adaptation is expected to be absolute. Aaron's silence does not mean the sacrifice is insignificant. It simply means he has chosen endurance over confrontation. The episode's central question, beauty is fleeting, is not truly about appearance. It is about what must be surrendered to belong. Matt surrendered nothing and was expelled for his past. Kendra nearly surrendered her emotional well-being. Judah struggles with identity. Esmeralda refuses to surrender self-expression. Aaron surrenders physical comfort without complaint. James surrenders strict obedience for compassion. The episode forces viewers to confront a difficult reality. Systems built on rigid morality often survive by demanding personal loss. Final thoughts, a turning point for the series. Episode 3 represents a tonal shift for Suddenly Amish. The novelty is gone. The emotional cost is now visible. This is no longer a gentle exploration of Amish life. It is a test of endurance, identity, and moral flexibility for both sides. As the season continues, the questions raised here will only grow louder. Who gets to belong? Who gets forgiven? And how much of yourself can you lose before the experiment fails? Tonight on TLC, Suddenly Amish airs with an all-new Tuesday, January 27th, 2026, Season 7, Episode 3 called Beauty is Fleeting. And we have your weekly Suddenly Amish recap below. In tonight's Suddenly Amish episode, as per the TLC synopsis, a sudden departure rattles the group. Esmeralda faces harsh judgment during her Amish makeover, and Kendra's heartbreak pushes James to break one of the biggest Amish rules. Tonight's episode is going to be exciting, you won't want to miss it, so be sure to tune in for our live coverage of the show tonight at 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. While you wait for our Suddenly Amish recap, hit the comments and let us know how excited you are about the return of the Amish family. Tonight's Suddenly Amish episode begins now. Refresh page often to get the most current updates. In tonight's Suddenly Amish, an Amish community welcomed the English Indiana. They did so as a means of repopulating the church. They wanted to rebuild, and they were figuring out pretty fast that they couldn't do so with these particular group of English. James chased off Matt. He did so with an axe in his hand. It was all because Matt was divorced. Matt recently got divorced, and he joined the show as a means of reconnecting with his faith. James just didn't see it. He said that Matt wasn't transparent. He thought if Matt could hide a divorce, that meant he could hide something else. Like a dark side. It was his logic. The others didn't necessarily agree. Alan felt that the pastor should have made the decision, not James. Kendra thought the same. Kendra had a bit of a crush on Matt. She fell apart after he left. She hid in a room to cry, and it wasn't all one-sided. Matt made sure to say goodbye to her. He tried to comfort her. The only thing that would work was if he stayed. He couldn't do that. He wasn't welcomed. He felt they weren't as understanding as he initially thought, and him leaving convinced Kendra of the same. She said the place began to feel like a prison once he left. She sat out on the porch to cry. She went out into the rain to dance. The woman was falling apart, and everyone could see it. One of the Amish mentioned that it was better to save one soul than to lose two. She didn't believe James was right by chasing off Matt. Alan was wondering what was the best step forward when a sign appeared. There were bats that managed to get into the house. It freaked out Billy Joe. She hates bats. She considered them rodents with wings that suck her blood. She woke up Alan in the night to help find the bats. He went looking for them. He found signs of them. He didn't find them, and so that made him believe it could be a bad prophecy. A bad prophecy was essentially a sign of impending doom or death if something flew around the house more than 4 times. Alan was afraid the bats were a bad prophecy about welcoming the English into their community. It also didn't help that he couldn't find the bats by the next day, so everyone went over to James's house to stay. Yes, the disapproving James. James didn't like secrets, and that had them all freaked about their own. Judah was worried about being bisexual. Billy Joe was afraid about what's in her past. She genuinely wanted to join the community. She wasn't merely visiting, and so James's actions had some far-reaching repercussions. Kendra was nearly the second to fall. She needed a phone. She needed to reconnect with someone in the outside world. They were building a phone shanty for emergencies, and it wasn't done yet, so Kendra broke into fresh tears. Kendra was ready to leave. She said she wanted to go home. She was tired of feeling trapped there. James then decided to show a different side of himself. He got Kendra a cell phone. Kendra got to call her mom and tell her that she loves her. She hugged James afterwards. The hug plus the phone were both taboos. They could both be shunned over it. Only it very much needed. Kendra initially saw James as the tough one, and now she sees he wasn't too bad. They could work together. Kendra ultimately decided to stay because James showed her such kindness. Then came the next hard part, following the dress code. They went to the Amish store. They bought clothes that were a little more breathable. They no longer had air conditioning, and it was hot at the time. Billy Joe had the easiest time adjusting to the new clothes. Kendra wasn't so bad. Judah had to get rid of his mustache because only married men could have them. He struggled with that. The clothes didn't bother him. It was the shaving that made him second-guess his decision to stay. Esmeralda had the toughest time of them all. She couldn't lose the nails or the lashes. She went there to get away from the judgment on social media, and now she was beginning to feel like she was still being judged. She could change into the clothes. She just couldn't toss out the nails or the eyelashes. She especially felt singled out when she heard that Judah was still allowed in Amish clothes in spite of not shaving. Aaron shaved. Judah didn't. Esmeralda wasn't allowed into a dress until she took off her stuff, so she took a stance. Was it the right one? Aaron wasn't allowed his hearing aids, and he managed. Suddenly Amish, titled Beauty is Fleeting, marks the moment when the social experiment stops feeling theoretical and begins to feel personal. What began as an attempt to bridge 2 vastly different worlds, the modern English participants and a conservative Amish community, now reveals the emotional, psychological, and moral costs of forced conformity. This episode is not driven by spectacle. Instead, it unfolds through quiet devastation, rigid rule enforcement, and moments of unexpected compassion. It becomes increasingly clear that this is no longer a show about cultural curiosity. It is a study in power, belonging, judgment, and survival within an uncompromising belief system. By the end of the hour, viewers are left with one unavoidable conclusion. Not everyone who enters this experiment will leave whole. The Amish goal, rebuilding through inclusion. At the heart of Suddenly Amish is a goal that appears noble on the surface. The Amish community has chosen to welcome a group of English outsiders as a way to repopulate their church, rebuild their numbers, and strengthen their faith-based future. The premise relies on the idea that spiritual yearning transcends background. That belief, however, is immediately challenged in this episode. What becomes clear is that inclusion is conditional. The Amish are not adapting to the English. The English are expected to adapt completely or leave. Matt's expulsion, the first irreversible loss. The episode opens in the emotional aftermath of Matt's sudden removal from the community. Matt joined the experiment seeking spiritual grounding after a painful divorce. Rather than being seen as a man attempting redemption, he becomes a symbol of moral contamination. James, a deeply conservative Amish authority figure, takes it upon himself to expel Matt after learning of his divorce. The manner in which the confrontation unfolds is deeply unsettling. James approaches, Matt holding an axe. While no physical violence occurs, the imagery is unmistakable. Authority is being enforced not through dialogue, but through intimidation. James explains his reasoning bluntly. If Matt concealed a divorce, he might be concealing other moral failings. This logic is rooted in absolute moral transparency. Within James's worldview, personal history is not contextual, it is damning. Who holds authority? One of the most significant tensions in the episode arises from the question of who gets to decide who belongs. Alan openly questions whether James had the authority to make such a decision. In Amish tradition, matters of discipline and exclusion are typically handled by church leadership, not individuals acting alone. Kendra agrees. For her, the issue is not simply Matt's divorce. It is the lack of compassion, process, and mercy. Matt's departure highlights a key contradiction within the experiment. The Amish community claims to be seeking growth, yet rejects individuals whose life experiences reflect modern reality. Divorce is not an anomaly among the English. It is common, complex, and often traumatic. By rejecting Matt outright, the community implicitly rejects much of the modern world it claims to be reaching out to. Kendra's emotional collapse. Kendra's reaction to Matt's exit becomes the emotional centerpiece of the episode. She does not lash out. She does not argue. Instead, she unravels quietly, retreating into grief that becomes impossible to ignore. She hides in a room to cry. She sits alone on the porch. Later, she walks into the rain and begins to dance, an unstructured, emotional release that communicates pain more effectively than words ever could. Kendra states plainly that after Matt left, the place began to feel like a prison. Her words are not an exaggeration. With no phone, no private support system, and no emotional outlet, the isolation becomes overwhelming. Matt's brief goodbye only deepens the wound. His kindness underscores what has been lost, not just a romantic connection, but a sense of emotional safety. A community divided. While James remains firm in his decision, not all Amish participants agree with him. One woman quietly observes that saving one's soul should not require sacrificing two. The comment is brief, but it carries immense weight. It suggests that rigid morality may ultimately undermine the very spiritual mission the community claims to uphold. The English participants begin to question whether compassion truly exists within this framework, or whether obedience matters more than humanity. The bats, omen or metaphor. As tensions escalate, the house becomes host to an unsettling disturbance. Bats. Billy Joe reacts with immediate fear. She wakes Alan in the middle of the night, insisting something is wrong. Alan searches the house and finds evidence of bats, but cannot locate them. This absence becomes symbolic. Within Amish belief systems, unexplained disturbances are often interpreted as omens. Alan recalls a superstition that something flying around a house multiple times can signal impending death or disaster. Unable to resolve the situation, Alan becomes convinced the bats are a bad prophecy, possibly a sign that welcoming the English was a mistake. The group decides to relocate to James's house, a decision heavy with irony. They seek shelter under the authority of the very man whose actions destabilize them. Living under scrutiny. Staying in James's home intensifies anxiety among the English participants. James's intolerance of secrecy creates an atmosphere of surveillance. Participants begin to fear their own truths. Judah worries about his bisexuality. He knows that if revealed, it could result in immediate rejection, or worse. Billy Joe fears that her past may disqualify her permanently. The experiment begins to feel less like cultural exchange and more like moral probation. Kendra nears the breaking point. Kendra's emotional distress escalates when she realizes she cannot contact the outside world. The community is constructing a phone shanty for emergencies, but it is unfinished. For Kendra, this delay is unbearable. She breaks down again, stating openly that she wants to leave. She is exhausted, grieving, and emotionally isolated. At this moment, it appears inevitable that she will become the second departure. James's rule-breaking act of compassion. In the episode's most surprising moment, James reveals a different side of himself. He gives Kendra a cell phone. This act violates Amish rules. Phones are forbidden. Physical affection is also restricted. When Kendra uses the phone to call her mother and later hugs James, both participants risk serious consequences, including shunning. Yet James does not hesitate. For the first time, viewers see a man wrestling with doctrine versus empathy. He chooses empathy. The phone call grounds Kendra emotionally. She tells her mother she loves her. The connection restores something she had lost. This single act transforms Kendra's perception of James. She no longer sees him as solely punitive. She sees him as human. She decides to stay. Dress code day. Identity on trial. The second half of the episode focuses on physical conformity. The group visits an Amish store to purchase approved clothing. With no air conditioning and rising temperatures, breathable fabrics are selected. Billy Joe adapts easily. Kendra manages despite emotional exhaustion. Judah's struggle is symbolic rather than physical. Amish rules require unmarried men to be clean-shaven. Judah must remove his mustache. For Judah, shaving feels like erasing identity. It forces him to confront how much of himself he is willing to lose to belong. Aaron complies fully. Judah hesitates. Esmeralda's resistance. Esmeralda faces the harshest scrutiny. She agrees to change her clothes but refuses to remove her acrylic nails and false eyelashes. For her, these are not cosmetic choices. They are expressions of selfhood. Esmeralda explains that she came to the Amish community to escape online judgment, not to encounter it in another form. She feels singled out when Judah is allowed to remain in Amish clothes despite not shaving, while she is barred until she removes her accessories. The double standard is undeniable. Esmeralda takes a stand. She refuses to comply. Her resistance forces the group to confront an uncomfortable truth. Conformity is not evenly enforced. Aaron's quiet sacrifice. Aaron faces his own challenge quietly. He is not allowed to wear his hearing aids. He manages without complaint, highlighting another harsh reality. Amish rules do not accommodate disability. Adaptation is expected to be absolute. Aaron's silence does not diminish the sacrifice. It underscores it. What beauty is fleeting really means. The title of the episode is Misleading on Purpose. This is not about physical beauty. It is about what is considered disposable in the pursuit of belonging. Matt's past. Kendra's emotional safety. Judah's identity. Esmeralda's self-expression. Aaron's accessibility. James's moral certainty. Each is tested. Some bend. Some break. Some refuse. Final analysis. The experiment enters dangerous territory. Episode 3 marks a turning point. The novelty is gone. The cost is visible. This episode asks questions the series can no longer avoid. Who decides worth? Who deserves grace? And how much must be sacrificed to belong? Suddenly Amish is no longer just observing culture. It is exposing the consequences of moral absolutism. From this point forward, every decision will carry emotional weight, and not everyone will survive the process unchanged. The unspoken contract of the experiment. By the midpoint of Beauty is Fleeting, an unspoken contract becomes painfully clear. The Amish community is offering shelter, tradition, and the possibility of spiritual belonging, but only on its own terms. The English participants are expected to surrender autonomy, privacy, and self-definition in exchange. What this episode reveals is that the contract is not negotiated equally. The Amish do not bend their system to accommodate difference. Difference is expected to dissolve. This realization reshapes the emotional experience of every English participant still standing. James, authority figure or moral gatekeeper. James emerges in this episode as both antagonist and paradox. On one hand, he enforces Amish rules with absolute rigidity. His decision to expel Matt demonstrates a worldview in which moral history outweighs present intention. In James's logic, transparency is synonymous with purity, and impurity is contagious. Yet James's later actions complicate this portrayal. By giving Kendra a cell phone and allowing physical affection, James violates core Amish rules. This is not a small transgression. In traditional Amish life, Such actions could result in shunning, social isolation, or loss of standing within the community. This contradiction forces a reevaluation of James's character. He is not simply a disciplinarian. He is a man struggling with the limits of doctrine when confronted with visible human suffering. His authority gives him the power to exclude, but it also gives him the power to protect. In Kendra's moment of emotional collapse, he chooses protection. This choice may haunt him in future episodes. Kendra's arc, from emotional dependency to conditional strength. Kendra's storyline in episode 3 is not merely about heartbreak. It is about emotional dependency colliding with enforced isolation. Matt's presence had functioned as an emotional anchor. His departure removes the one person who made the environment feel safe and navigable. Without him, Kendra is forced to confront the full weight of Amish isolation without preparation. Her breakdown is gradual, not explosive. She does not rebel. She grieves. Her declaration that the place feels like a prison is not an accusation, it is an observation. The absence of choice, communication, and emotional expression transforms tradition into confinement. James's intervention gives her temporary relief, but it also reinforces a dangerous truth. Survival depends on permission. Kendra stays, but her decision is not rooted in empowerment. It is rooted in mercy granted by authority. This imbalance sets the stage for future emotional vulnerability. The psychological impact of isolation. One of the most striking elements of Beauty is Fleeting is how quickly isolation affects mental stability. The Amish lifestyle is designed around communal resilience. Members grow up within its constraints and are emotionally conditioned to function without modern outlets. The English participants are not. Without phones, music, privacy, or familiar coping mechanisms, emotions have nowhere to go. Grief, anxiety, and fear are amplified. Kendra's rain dance is a manifestation of this pressure. It is not performative. It is instinctual. This episode subtly critiques the assumption that faith alone is sufficient emotional infrastructure. Superstition versus faith. The bats as a cultural fault line. The bat incident exposes a fault line within Amish belief itself. While Amish theology emphasizes humility and submission to God, folk superstition still plays a role in daily interpretation of events. Alan's fear that the bats represent a bad prophecy reveals how fear-based interpretation can override reason. Rather than addressing the problem practically, the group relocates. This response mirrors the treatment of Matt. When confronted with discomfort or perceived impurity, the instinct is removal, not resolution. The bats are never found. The threat is imagined, yet the consequences are real. In this way, the bats become a metaphor for how fear governs decision-making within the community. Living under moral surveillance. Relocating to James's house intensifies the feeling of being watched. James's intolerance for secrecy creates an environment where self-censorship becomes necessary. The English participants begin to edit their personalities, histories, and even thoughts. Judah's fear of exposure is particularly telling. His bisexuality is not something he expresses openly, yet the fear of discovery looms constantly. This kind of psychological pressure does not encourage spiritual growth. It encourages concealment. Ironically, James's obsession with transparency may be producing the very secrecy he condemns. Judah's identity crisis, masculinity, sexuality, and belonging. Judah's struggle in episode 3 is quieter than Kendra's, but equally profound. The requirement that unmarried men be clean-shaven seems minor on the surface. In practice, it represents a deeper demand. Submit your body to community standards. For Judah, the mustache is more than facial hair. It is a symbol of self-expression and modern masculinity. Being forced to shave becomes an act of symbolic erasure. Compounding this struggle is Judah's internal fear regarding his sexuality. While the show does not depict open confrontation, the tension is palpable. Judah is acutely aware that full honesty could result in expulsion. His hesitation at the shaving chair is not vanity. It is resistance. Esmeralda, the line between adaptation and erasure. Esmeralda's conflict becomes the most overt challenge to Amish authority in the episode. Unlike Judah, She refuses to comply quietly. Her acrylic nails and false eyelashes are dismissed by the community as superficial. For Esmeralda, they represent autonomy in a world that constantly critiques her appearance. She explains that she joined the Amish experience to escape online judgment, not to submit to a new form of it. Her refusal exposes a glaring inconsistency. Judah is allowed partial noncompliance, while Esmeralda is barred entirely. This disparity suggests that enforcement is not neutral. It is influenced by gender, perception, and discomfort. Esmeralda's stand is not about beauty. It is about dignity, gender expectations, and unequal enforcement. The episode subtly highlights how Amish expectations differ based on gender. Judah's noncompliance is treated as a transitional struggle. Esmeralda's noncompliance is treated as defiance. This difference reveals how women's bodies are policed more aggressively. Appearance becomes a moral battleground, particularly for women. Esmeralda's resistance challenges not just Amish rules, but the assumption that femininity must be subdued to be virtuous. Her storyline is likely to become a major fault line moving forward. Aaron's silence, disability, and invisibility. Aaron's experience is one of the most troubling elements of the episode. He is required to go without his hearing aids, tools essential to daily functioning. The show does not dramatize his struggle. He does not complain. This silence is revealing. The Amish system does not accommodate difference. It assumes uniform capability. Aaron's compliance highlights the emotional burden placed on those whose needs do not fit within rigid tradition. His quiet endurance contrasts sharply with Esmeralda's vocal resistance, underscoring how compliance often comes at invisible cost. The title revisited, "What is truly fleeting?" Beauty is fleeting initially appears to reference physical appearance. In reality, the title speaks to temporary tolerance. Compassion is fleeting. Flexibility is fleeting. Acceptance is fleeting. What remains constant is the demand for conformity. The episode suggests that beauty, whether physical, emotional, or personal, is expendable when it threatens order. Long-term spoiler implications. Episode 3 sets several trajectories that will likely define the remainder of the season. James's authority will be increasingly questioned. Kendra's emotional stability remains fragile. Judah's identity conflict is unresolved. Esmeralda's resistance positions her as a potential exit or catalyst. Aaron's sacrifice raises ethical questions about inclusion. The Amish community's goal of repopulation appears fundamentally incompatible with modern lived experience. The experiment is no longer neutral ground. It is a proving ground. Final assessment. The cost becomes visible. By the end of Beauty is Fleeting, the experiment has crossed a threshold. This is no longer about curiosity or education. It is about what individuals are willing or forced to give up to remain. Some participants bend. Some endure. Some resist. Some leave. What unites them is the realization that belonging has a price, and not everyone can afford it. The illusion of voluntary participation. By the third act of Beauty is Fleeting, the experiment exposes a critical contradiction. While participation is technically voluntary, the conditions of survival are not. The English participants are free to leave, but only by forfeiting emotional bonds, personal investment, and the hope that this experience might lead to spiritual clarity or belonging. Staying requires submission. Leaving requires loss. This dynamic creates an illusion of choice. In reality, participants are navigating a system where every decision carries emotional punishment. Compliance offers temporary safety. Resistance invites exclusion. Departure guarantees regret. This structure mirrors high-control environments more than cultural exchange. Power without accountability. One of the most troubling themes of the episode is the concentration of power without clear accountability. James's authority is assumed, not formally granted within the context of the experiment. Yet his decisions carry irreversible consequences. Matt's expulsion is final. There is no appeal. No communal deliberation. No pastoral intervention. The English participants quickly learn that authority is personalized, not procedural. This matters because personalized authority is unpredictable. Compassion depends on mood, perception, and personal bias rather than consistent standards. James shows mercy to Kendra, but not to Matt. Judah receives leniency that Esmeralda does not. Aaron's needs are ignored entirely. The lack of consistent enforcement creates confusion and fear. Conditional compassion, a dangerous precedent. James's act of giving Kendra a cell phone is framed as kindness, and it is. But it also establishes a dangerous precedent. Compassion becomes conditional and selective. Kendra receives grace because her pain is visible, her distress aligns with socially acceptable vulnerability, and her compliance has never been in question. Matt does not receive grace because his past violates moral codes. Esmeralda does not receive grace because her resistance challenges authority. Aaron does not receive grace because his struggle is quiet. This hierarchy of compassion reveals how systems often reward suffering that conforms while punishing suffering that disrupts. Emotional dependency as a survival strategy. As the episode progresses, it becomes clear that emotional dependency is not accidental. It is a survival strategy. Kendra's reliance on Matt was not weakness. It was adaptation. In an environment stripped of familiar supports, people latch onto whatever connection offers stability. When that connection is removed, the emotional fallout is severe. The experiment unintentionally replicates conditions where bonding becomes intensified due to isolation. Relationships carry disproportionate emotional weight because they are the only outlet available. This dynamic raises ethical questions about the psychological safety of the participants. Surveillance culture and self-erasure. Living under constant moral evaluation forces participants into self-erasure. Judah's fear is not just about rejection. It is about annihilation of self. His bisexuality is not a behavior that can be modified. It is identity. Within the Amish framework presented, that identity has no place. The result is silence. Billy Joe similarly suppresses aspects of her past. Kendra moderates her emotional expression once she receives mercy. Aaron minimizes his needs. The culture of surveillance does not create virtue. It creates invisibility. Esmeralda's resistance as structural threat. Esmeralda's refusal to remove her nails and eyelashes is the most structurally threatening act in the episode. Unlike emotional breakdowns or private fears, resistance is public. It forces confrontation. Esmeralda's stance challenges 3 core assumptions. 1. That appearance is morally neutral. 2. That adaptation must be total. 3. That authority should go unquestioned. Her refusal exposes the fragility of the system. If one person can say no, the rules lose their inevitability. This is why her resistance is met with disproportionate pressure. Gendered control and moral policing. The episode quietly but clearly demonstrates how women's bodies become sites of moral enforcement. Esmeralda's nails and lashes are framed as symbols of vanity. Kendra's emotional expression is managed through permission. Billy Joe's fears are dismissed as irrational. Meanwhile, Judah's noncompliance is treated as transitional rather than defiant. This pattern reflects broader gender dynamics in conservative religious systems, where women are expected to embody modesty as a moral obligation rather than a personal choice. Esmeralda's resistance disrupts this expectation. Aaron's experience. Inclusion without accommodation. Aaron's storyline underscores one of the episode's most serious ethical failings. By requiring him to go without hearing aids, the community prioritizes uniformity over accessibility. His ability to participate fully is compromised, yet this is framed as necessary adaptation. There is no discussion of accommodation, no exploration of compromise. The message is clear: difference must be overcome individually, not supported collectively. Aaron's quiet compliance highlights how systems often rely on the silence of those most affected. Faith versus fear, a crisis of spiritual integrity. Despite its religious framing, the episode repeatedly demonstrates that fear drives decision-making more than faith. Matt is expelled not because of harm caused, but because of fear of impurity. The bats prompt relocation due to superstition. Secrecy is punished because of fear of deception. Difference is suppressed because of fear of disruption. Faith, ideally, would offer stability and grace. Instead, fear dictates boundaries. This tension suggests a deeper crisis within the Amish community itself, a struggle between spiritual ideals and survival instincts. The rebuilding paradox. The Amish community's stated goal is to rebuild and repopulate the church. Episode 3 reveals the paradox at the heart of that goal. To grow, the community must accept difference. To preserve identity, it must reject difference. This contradiction makes long-term success unlikely. Every participant who leaves represents not just a personal failure, but a structural one. Spoiler forecast. Who is most at risk? Based on Episode 3, several trajectories become apparent. Esmeralda is the most likely to leave next if compromise is not offered. Judah faces an internal breaking point that may force a decision. Kendra remains emotionally fragile despite choosing to stay. Aaron may quietly endure until endurance becomes impossible. James risks losing moral authority if inconsistencies continue. The experiment's stability depends on resolving these tensions, but the system as presented lacks the flexibility to do so. The cost of staying. By the end of Beauty is Fleeting, staying is no longer framed as triumph. Staying means suppressing identity, accepting unequal treatment, depending on selective mercy, a living under surveillance, enduring emotional deprivation. Leaving, however, carries its own cost: emotional loss, perceived failure, public judgment, unanswered spiritual questions. The show offers no easy path. Final reflection. A line has been crossed. Episode 3 marks the moment Suddenly Amish crosses from observation into confrontation. The experiment is no longer asking participants to learn. It is asking them to submit. Whether submission leads to spiritual growth or personal harm remains the central question moving forward.